Hey, Kathy from the future here to say a few things just in front of the video you're about to see. First of all, thank you to the question asker. It's Vega Dale. They asked the question about Austrian and German literature. So thank you for that really fascinating question. And then I do kind of mention something about I will talk about Mozilla and I don't. But I will get back to it. So I will get back to the Mozilla question another time. In general, I have to say I haven't found my way into him, but I might say more about that at another time. So that's going to be in front of the video you're about to see. Bye. Welcome everyone to my channel, the Grimm Reader. I come to you today on this Saturday, my day off, to chat a little bit about one of the questions I received. I still haven't gone through all of them. I'm sorry, being really busy. And so one of the questions was, do you find any systematic differences between Austrian and German literature in terms of syntax, rhythm, theme, etc.? And that question has been occupying my mind for a while now because I keep thinking about my answer to it. Let me go on here, to maybe cover a couple more ones. There's also a question about my opinion on Robert Musil, the great Austrian writer. I wanted to address that too. And then there's a couple of other answers that will just have to be saved for other videos. I'm heading full steam ahead towards the time when I will be more relaxed and will be able to film more videos. So I will get to all the rest of the questions. I apologize for being unable to answer them in a sort of efficient way. Getting back to the one about Austrian and German, and I really have to say, generally speaking, from my personal perspective, no. And no, because no systematic differences. Perhaps one general comment that one can say towards writers coming from the south, so Austria, but perhaps even going to Munich, although I don't think any of the ones I have here are from that area. They're either Austrian or somewhere else, Germany. The one thing I noticed is the dialect down south is different, and I'll just give you one sort of minor, it's just a dialect difference that does pop up in the writing. I remember opening Thomas Bernhard, the Austrian writer, contemporary, well, 20th century, not exactly contemporary writer, classical, back then, very highly thought of. And I just opened up to his book, Holzfällen, Cutting Wood, and I really enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it more than the one about Wittgenstein. And I just opened to the first page, and one thing that I noticed is sorry to be talking about the German language, but this is what it's about. So German uses a conversational past. When you speak conversationally about the past, you use the perfect tense. So you have the two-part tense of a helping verb, an auxiliary, and a past participle always. And so it leads to and then on the first page here, I saw how, so he's using the past perfect, which uses the past tense of either to have or to be. So present perfect, the normal perfect, uses the present tense, of to have or to be. So I have gone, and in German, the problem with German is sometimes it uses to be for its perfect. So in German, you say, I am gone to the store. And it just means I went to the store. But the problem is that, so this helping verb issue, the further south you get, the more sometimes they'll use to be when Northern Germaners will use to have. I'm trying to think of an example. Well, let me use the one from the book, the first page here. He says, so in German you say, I sat in the chair, and you would use you'd say, I have sat in the chair. Ich habe im Sessel gesessen. But in Southern German you say, you can say, ich bin im Sessel gesessen, which sounds kind of strange to me, but I guess you do say that. Ich bin im Sessel gesessen, and then he's saying, he's using the past tense, gesessen war, in welchem ich gesessen war, instead of gesessen hatte. So I'm sorry to be so nitty-gritty about it, but that's a clear indication of the Austrian. So I guess that might rise to the level of systematic difference, but it's the dialect. But beyond that, I would say the main difference sometimes, and I really think you have to kind of go by author, which is sort of difficult. You have to contextualize every author in their own world, because their relationship to what they're doing with their literary language is all different. And one thing I'd say is the authors that I tend to like, so literary people, they are very intentional about their relationship to language. They're using it in specific rhetorical ways or to create a certain effect. And so that's another reason why we need to sort of look at each case individually a little bit. It's hard to sort of say things across the board. In a certain sense, it's easy perhaps to say things across the board about style by cutting it off in terms of time periods. So 19th century writing is different from 20th century, perhaps. Same like in English. So yeah, just some general comments about that. And so the one difference is sometimes I find that the Austrian writers, it's the level of vocab. But see, that's the whole point that I'm trying to make here in a very circuitous way, is that for me, I was reading the German writer from the Berlin area, so the countryside around Berlin. It's called Mark Brandenburg. One of my favorite German writers is Theodor Fontana, mainly well known for Effie Briest. So he's from northeastern part of Germany. I remember having a look, and he's also someone who, part of his relationship to language is to bring in the oral sort of tones of the for lack of a better term, peasant classes. Like he even does this thing where he'll have people talk direct speech, and you'll have to sort of figure out what they're trying to say because they're speaking in dialect of the area of Brandenburg, so northeast Germany. And I found myself with this one. This took me a long time before the storm, so just the time before Napoleon, having to look up a lot of terms that are regional. So I guess my point is that a lot of German writing is attentive to its where it's from. Regionality is a big theme with at least the people that I know. It's not always the case, but even like a new book that I didn't bring over here, that I just read this year, Ulice, the sort of entertaining COVID novel about having to get along with right-wingers in her little town, had a lot of local color, and it was all predicated on moving from the city to the rural. So I would say one theme you see in German literature in general, is very general, is the sort of dichotomy of rural versus urbane existence, and the sort of, sometimes you could say, the fish out of water things that you get, either the country bumpkin going to the city or the citified young woman coming to this very rural area and having to get a sense of it. And so that's language comes in there too a little bit. So nothing really specific German, Austrian, it's more other things that I find. Every author is different. One of my favorites from the 19th century, the Austrian author, and I'm really very close to just diving back into one of my favorite novels, Indian Summer by Adalbert Stifter. Very interesting fellow, painter, depressive, did unalive himself in a kind of dramatic way, and he's all about the rural and the sort of idyllic almost, and he's been faulted for that as being too much about the little life, the quiet life, and he is, but he's doing something kind of sneaky with it. I think he's kind of, I was reading a quote about it, this obsessive attention to the houses one lives in and furniture is something. There's something going on there. It's some kind of comment on modernity versus the olden times. Not exactly nostalgia. It's more complicated than that. Sorry, I'm being general per usual. But so he's Austrian, and he has that thing going on, and I'd have to reread it to get into if there's actual Austrian things going on in his writing. So he's someone who I completely misdiagnosed in terms of language, because this is Hermann Broch, and the novel, the first part of this long novel in 3 parts, almost like 3 short novels, The Sleepwalkers. I read the first one, and it's all about a Prussian soldier, a nobility sort of officer, a Prussian officer. So I just assumed he was German, and it turns out Broch's Austrian, and he's just completely Austrian. But he decided to write his novel about militaristic stuff or people in the military, and he bases it on a Prussian person. And I don't know why exactly. Perhaps he was just more interested in the bigger country. Not well, but see, back then they were both big. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was huge and messy, and both of them were completely militaristic to the, that it drips down into other levels of society in a way that we can't really imagine anymore. How militaristic, how much the soldier was the centerpiece, and their relationship to the army. And even if you weren't in the army, we'd work for the press aspects of the army. A lot of people worked, the writers did. And of course that becomes a big theme, but I was shocked to find out that he was actually Austrian, and yet he's writing these books about Prussian stuff. And he's a very interesting writer. I don't know much about his biography beyond finding out that he was Austrian. And when I read this, I was going to use him as an example of someone who doesn't sound Austrian at all, but now I have to go check. And he must have sort of paid attention to the idiom being Prussian when he wrote this. I don't know why he decided to go with the sort of not Austrian. It's an interesting question. Maybe I'll find out the answer and I'll tell you one day. It was a very, very good book. And it does have a lot of parallels, or some parallels, to the one I'm just finishing by Josef Roth, another Austrian. They sort of overlap. Roth was a bit younger, but also died much sooner because he was an unstable personality. And his novel Radetzky March, which is very much centered on Austria and the demise of the Austro-Hungarian stuff. And his language is, so at the level of vocab, sometimes you'll get Austrian words or terms for things. But other than that, I don't find systematic. If you read it out to me, I don't think, unless there was something about the theme or some word, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, that's Austrian, which is very different from when people open their mouths. I remember first seeing an interview with Thomas Bernhard, and the minute he opens his mouth, I'm like, okay, he's from Austria, and specifically Viennese, this lilting, musical, urbane-sounding dialect that they have. And so another person who the regional stuff comes into play so much in her writing, and even when she opens her mouth too, is Herta Müller, the Nobel Prize-winning German/Romanian writer. So she grew up in an enclave of German-speaking people in Romania, sort of like Paul Celan, the poet. And her idiom is just kind of drenched with this very poetic, very kind of lyrical attitude towards her speech, and her books too. They're very poetic. They're very sort of simple words that kind of express things in a very deep way. And even when she talks in her interviews, she's very much about how the regimes of autocrats and dictators have influenced people's lives in a detrimental way. And so she's very outspoken about Putin, and I just think it's so mean when people accuse her of being naive. It's this whataboutism that I see on some of the comments, and I think part of it is just sexist stuff. Like, they just don't, because she has such a simple, almost pleading way of talking, and you can see her emotions about how much she hates Putin, which I really respond to. She was great when she came to our campus and she gave this talk about the levels of meanness that the government goes to destroy relationships and people. She really has an insight into that. And so her language is different yet again because of her growing up in this enclave. So many, people like Kafka who grow up in Prague speaking German, and they have Yiddish and they have Czech around them, their language will be different too. And you can sort of notice it, but I think there again, it has more to do with the fact that they're writers, they're intentional, or they're interested in language, and so they cultivate what they want, their style is what I'm trying to say, in a very vague way. So that's Müller, someone else, another Austrian one. I'd have to reread it. All I can say is that I immensely enjoyed this short novella by Franz Werfel. Another person who I don't know that much about, another Austrian writer from yesteryear. Let me see. So a little bit, kind of at the same time as Roth, a little bit, so born 1890 and hung out with all the same sort of people, Alma Mahler, Gropius, and things, all kinds of things. And then, of course, a lot of these people either emigrate or don't even make it to emigration. This is from the 30s, a really interesting novel about an affair, and it's called a Pale Blue Woman's Handwriting, and I think it has been translated, and I highly recommend it. It's a short, poignant, sad read. My main guy, probably my favorite writer, is Thomas Mann, completely German, from Lübeck, so North German. The same goes for him. With him, you wouldn't ever think that he's Austrian, but he's definitely someone interested in his own style. That's why he's great. He's a stylist, and I know he did spend some time. But with him, it's just, and I do remember, like in Buddenbrooks, which is about Lübeck, the growing up part, he uses dialect too, to a certain degree. And as I recall, I'd have to reread it to get more precise insights. The older generation used the North German, I guess it's a form of Low German, to say certain things and to make pronouncements about things. And you don't get that much with the younger people, I don't think. So the older generations speak more dialect. And that's kind of another statement he's trying to make. And then I just pulled off randomly someone who's just completely intentional about his language, another German, sort of somewhat northern German writer, the modernist, Arno Schmidt, who you really have to, kind of be open to the stylistic modernist, kind of like Joyce, very referential stuff that he's doing, and also just kind of wacky stuff sometimes stylistically. I'm looking at this novel that I sort of thought I might start, but I'm not sure if I have time. And it's written in this very sort of stream of consciousness way with, I can't bother it's too small the font to show you exactly what he's doing. But so there it's as if the language almost, the level of intentionality that these postmodern or modernists kind of do eclipses any kind of sense of where they're from in the sense of German versus Austria. It's just about an idea that I had, and another person I'm thinking about here, but I don't have any of her books on me, is Elfriede Jelinek, Austrian modernist, and she won the Nobel Prize too. And both, in a certain sense, my sense with people like Schmidt or Jelinek, they almost invent their own languages, like Joyce too. And so you have to sort of be willing to learn their languages, and that takes a lot of time, and you have to sort of just be in the right brain space to want to do that, as opposed to just reading a book, however great it is. There's a level of complexity there. You have to do that to a certain degree with people like Bernhard too, but I think someone like Jelinek or Schmidt even more so. So it's like, it's not even about Austrian versus German, it's about learning Jelinekian or Schmidt's language, and that's what I would say about it. So kind of honing in on the specificity of people's works. Not to say that when you read them, you don't make connections, but it's at the level of content, perhaps more than style. So yeah, those are my very, very off the cuff, on my day off thoughts about the Austrian versus German connection. And I showed you a bunch of books. Let me know if, and it is issue with translation. You don't often get the slight regional aspects. I don't even know how they would translate someone like Fontana, who has a lot of dialect. It reminds me of, just an aside here, when we went to see the movies Trainspotting a long time ago, and we saw it dubbed into German, which I was at first like not really into, but I have a feeling I understood more of what they were actually saying than hearing it in the Scots. I would have needed subtitles. So even though, I don't know, it's like you do lose something of the original tone in translation. That's the problem of translation. But on the other hand, it's the only way we're going to be able to read other people's works. And so yeah, that's the other thing. I'll let you go. 19 minutes of talking about this stuff in general, and I hope it was somewhat interesting, and I will see you at some point later. Bye.